Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Russia says it is ready for a world without US-Russia nuclear arms limits as the New START treaty expires this week. Without a last-minute deal, both sides lose all constraints on strategic nuclear arsenals for the first time in over 50 years. The Kremlin says it has heard no word from India about halting Russian oil purchases, despite Donald Trump's claim. Trump says a new trade deal cuts US tariffs on Indian goods to 18% in return for India stopping Russian oil and lowering trade barriers. Zelenskyy says Moscow fires over 70 missiles and 450 drones at Ukraine, accusing Russia of choosing escalation over diplomacy. Strikes damage Kyiv's landmarks and energy sites, leaving more than 1,000 homes without heating as temperatures drop. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte arrives in the Ukrainian capital hours after Russia launches its largest drone and missile attack of the year. Zelenskyy shares video of both leaders honoring fallen Ukrainian soldiers at a central memorial. The son of Norway's crown princess pleads not guilty to 4 counts of rape in an Oslo court. Prosecutors say he faces 38 charges, including assault, punishable by up to 16 years in prison. US officials say Israel is pressing Washington to strike Iran, but Donald Trump is reluctant and does not want to take military action. Advisors say his view could shift if Iran fails to offer concessions in upcoming talks. Ethiopia's Prime Minister accuses Eritrea of mass killings and looting during the Tigray War, despite both sides being allies at the time. In his first public acknowledgement of Eritrean atrocities in a conflict that kills at least 600,000 people. A senior UAE official says Iran needs to reach a deal with the US. Sources say United States and Iranian officials are likely to meet in Turkey on February the 6th. We start this hour in South Asia, and the Indian Union Minister of Commerce and Industry, Piyush Goyal, says that the US-India trade deal will open up significant opportunities across multiple export-orientated sectors, including MSMES, engineering, textiles, gems and jewelry, leather goods and marine products. Meanwhile, Russia insists that it has not received any official communication from India regarding halt in oil purchases. This comes after US President Donald Trump made comments on India's energy relationship with Russia. However, Kremlin officials reiterated the importance of Russia's strategic partnership with India and their intention to continue developing bilateral ties. Joining us to discuss this huge development is Peter Cardillo. He is a chief economist from Spartan Capitals. He joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Peter, for talking to us on this issue. In Trump fashion, of course, this was announced last night in a Truth Social post claiming that United States' tariffs on Indian goods have been slashed down from 15 to 18%. But of course, that huge development that India has agreed to stop buying Russian oil, and he also included a claim that India would buy $500 billion worth of US goods. Who takes the better side of this deal, Peter?
Well, let's say that it's certainly a relief to India, and the real question here is, what did Modi have to give up to obtain this? And obviously, cheap Russian oil. He recently announced a deal with Venezuela, and obviously, the U.S. now controls the Venezuelan oil sector. And so he's going to be paying for higher oil. But it also opens up a multitude of various trade aspects that should be beneficial to India. And so I think you might say it's a win-win situation for the United States and for India. And of course, it also showed us that, Trump was eager to make a deal after the EU made a deal with India. But again, the key is oil prices. And so he had to give up some to get something, and vice versa.
How much does Donald Trump value India as a trading partner? Of course, you've mentioned that huge EU India trade deal that was announced at the Republic Day celebrations last week. Do you think that was the catalyst which led to this? And how much of an impact or a win is that halting or claimed halting of Russian oil really going to be here?
Well, let's see now what happens if there's a back way door that Modi might want to choose to, buying cheap oil from Russia and buying more expensive oil from the United States makes a big difference in the Indian budget and in the growth pattern. So I don't think for the moment that there'll be many changes, but I'm sure somewhere along the line, maybe through other channels, possibly the EU, that the Prime Minister of India would like to get cheaper oil. And the question is, when? And of course, if that were to happen, then that means that this deal could unravel. But I think that for the intermediate future, that's not going to happen.
Peter Cardillo, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Lovely to talk to you on these issues as always. We now turn over to West Asia for our next update. And Qatar's Foreign Ministry spokesman, Majid Al-Ansari, has said that there is regional collaboration and ongoing efforts aimed at ensuring de-escalation concerning Iran. Last week, the Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani met with top Iranian security official Ali Larijani in Tehran and reviewed efforts to de-escalate tensions in the region. Qatar says it is working closely with neighbouring countries and friendly nations to maintain stability in the region. Officials highlight Turkey, Egypt, Oman and Saudi Arabia as key partners in these efforts. Qatar emphasises that this is a collective effort aimed at de-escalating tensions and ensuring peace, making clear the country is not acting alone but in tandem with others to protect the region. Let's in fact listen into some of the comments coming in from Qatar.
الزيارة إلى طهران. كما تعلم أن الاتصالات جارية ومستمرة كما قلنا قبل قليل على أعلى المستويات بين حضرة صاحب السمو أمير البلاد المفدى والرئيس الإيراني، والزيارة التي قام بها طبعا معالي رئيس مجلس الوزراء، واتصالات بين مختلف المسؤولين في قطر بين الأطراف لضمان خفض التصعيد في المنطقة. هذا يتم طبعا خلال الأيام الماضية ليس فقط من قبل قطر بل من قبل جميع الأطراف الإقليمية، وهناك تواصل إقليمي طبعا رأيتموه عالي جدا في إطار محاولات خفض التوتر في المنطقة وضمان عدم العودة إلى.
David K. Johnston joins us now, an American financial journalist and author, joining us live from New York. Thank you very much for joining us, David. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you on these issues. Donald Trump, of course, a leader prevalent in Middle East relations. We see him sometimes commit this kind of balancing act when, of course, the United States is a loyal and traditional ally to Israel. But Donald Trump has found a new fondness for these Gulf nations like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia. And so this issue really is walking a tightrope for him. How much would Trump subordinate Gulf diplomacy to Israeli security concerns when it comes to this matter?
Well, the U.S. government, long before Donald Trump, has basically made its bed with Israel for two principal reasons. One is what happened with the Holocaust in Germany, and secondly, it's a democracy, the only democracy in the region. And so you're going to see the U.S. continue to support Israel even when it's doing outrageous things like the excessive conduct in Gaza, where the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, now admits that, 70,000 dead Gazans, which they had denied. And so in everything Trump does there, you need to think carefully about what is Israel's interest in these things. And at the same time, Donald Trump's supporters, the MAGA group, who are a quarter to a fifth of Americans, they do not want any more foreign military actions. They don't want any 20-year wars, and they're very unhappy with Trump, many of them, because of things like his stationing a relatively small group of ships off the coast of Iran, certainly not enough to engage in a war, and it's designed to simply demonstrate Donald's bellicose side, and that's a significant part of who he is.
David, we've of course seen pretty hawkish foreign policy from Donald Trump. He struck Iran before already, those nuclear bases back at the end of that 12-day war with Israel. What's holding him back this time and making him give diplomacy a chance?
Well, the kickback he is getting in America from the MAGA supporters is first and foremost. His MAGA coalition has slowly begun to fracture over issues like saying we're going to annex Greenland, we're going to make Canada the 51st state, we're going to use military force against Cuba and Panama and other places. And then secondly, over the Jeffrey Epstein files that only half of which have been released, and they say we're not going to release anymore. And Trump needs to constantly create chaos. It's been part of his nature the whole nearly 40 years I've known and covered him. It is a way that he keeps other people off their footings.
Do you think we're going to see a shift in his foreign policy leading up to those midterms? As you've said, the MAGA base, also known as the America First base, some now say those two are splitting camps, is very much not that old-style neoconservative. It believes in America not getting involved in foreign wars, something which Donald Trump himself has spoken about. He was largely against the invasion of Iraq in 2003, but many critics of his say his actions, especially during his second term, doesn't prove that, in fact, the opposite. So do you think that now Donald Trump is moving closer and closer to those midterms in November? Do you think that he is indeed being reluctant to take that neoconservative sort of approach that the people who are surrounding him very closely seem to be pushing him towards?
Well, the politically smart move would be to back up and rely on diplomacy. But, Donald is Donald. At 79 years old, he's cooked. He's not going to fundamentally change. And he likes to inflict pain. I mean, he's called for summary executions of people who he thinks have committed crimes, even though in many cases they have not. I won't be the least bit surprised if we see some limited airstrikes, but you're not going to see a ground invasion. You're going to see a lot of efforts to talk. And Qatar is where America has its largest military base in the Middle East. So Qatar is closely allied with and interested in the U.S. and wants to avoid some larger regional war, as do the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainians, everyone else.
What is the goal here, David? Is regime change there in the list of objectives? Of course, we've had, you see the likes of Lindsey Graham, other neocons surrounding Trump, openly speaking about this type of thing. But given the fact that Donald Trump is being reluctant in striking Iran, Do you think the regime change still is on top of the list here when it comes to Iran?
Well, Donald is very mercurial. He jumps from issue to issue without any long-term strategic thinking. I think it's quite clear from the size of the demonstrations that the regime in Tehran is not stable. And the U.S. is absolutely going to be doing behind the scenes and elsewhere, as will the Israelis, everything they can to topple that regime. And of course, there's enormous enmity between Riyadh and Tehran. If there's anything that scares the Saudis, it is the continued regime in Tehran. On the other hand, Iran is one of the youngest countries in the world in its population, and the vast majority of Iranians have lived their entire lives under the post-Khomeini government, starting in 1979. And very clearly, a lot of them are fed up with it. They want to have some liberty. They are not interested in living in the 9th century.
Do stay with us, David, as we move on to our next story and we turn to Europe. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has accused Russia of exploiting a brief US-brokered pause in attacks to stockpile missiles rather than support diplomacy. Russia launched its most powerful strike this year on Ukraine's energy sector, targeting power plants and infrastructure in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa and other cities. Temperatures fell to minus 20 degrees Celsius, leaving over 1,000 tower blocks in Kyiv without any heating. Zelenskyy said Russia is choosing terror and escalation over dialogue, calling for maximum pressure from Ukraine's allies. Officials reported more than 70 ballistic and cruise missiles and 450 drones overwhelmed air defences, causing significant damage to both civilian and state-run energy facilities. Zelenskyy warned that without pressure on Russia, the war will not end and residents continue to face freezing conditions amid repeated attacks. David joins us once again on this. Would Trump accept that pauses help Russia, or argue that Ukraine should push harder for talks and maybe concede more when it comes to its diplomacy?
Well, what the Russians just did, and Zelenskyy complains about, is probably the most predictable event so far this year. Gee, we have a temporary ceasefire, and the Russians use it to move forward and deploy missiles and drones. I'm sure the Ukrainians made similar efforts to do the same thing. I mean, this is a war of attrition, and so every delay, every break simply gives the Russians the opportunity to position themselves better. Now, the Ukrainians say they knocked down about half of the incoming missiles. I don't know how many of the drones, but half of the incoming missiles. At the same time, those that got through did more damage to the energy infrastructure. And of course, at this time of the year, Ukraine is a bitterly cold country, much colder than where I live. And so knocking out the infrastructure produces a lot of hardship and is intended to break the resolve of the Ukrainian people. So you're going to see more of this going forward. We're about to get into the muddy season in March when there won't be a lot of troop movements except by train rather than by wheeled, rubber-tired vehicle.
David, we're gearing up for those talks tomorrow in the Emirati capital. What are your expectations going into it, given this development?
Well, diplomacy is always about a lot of talking and working on this little detail and that detail, and takes time. But I think here, this is just overwhelmingly a stalling game to a resolution as Russia presses its efforts to acquire land it's been unable to acquire despite an incredibly horrible butcher's bill on the front lines. They've captured almost no territory despite all the casualties they've had in the fourth year of the war. And the Ukrainians need to keep Donald Trump on the farm. They need to not do anything that will annoy him and cause him to withdraw the access to intelligence or the supply of war material. I'm still surprised that the Europeans, who recognize the existential threat Putin's expansionism poses, haven't deeply and quickly stepped up their military aid. They've provided more than the U.S. overall, but in terms of the monetary value, but they really haven't stepped up the game. They've continued this sort of marginal tit-for-tat response to this war. And frankly, as long as Trump remains in office and the Russians are unable to conquer Kyiv, I think this war will continue. And you and I, Thomas, will be talking about this in all likelihood in 2028.
Indeed. And David, if this doesn't annoy Donald Trump, however, you say, what will? Of course, this comes as a temporary pause of hitting Kyiv and its energy facilities. It also comes as peace talks are literally the next day. Do you think that Trump thinks that Putin is taking these talks seriously?
No, not at all. I think they're being used as an excuse. I do think it's probably significant that Trump, in this phone call with Modi over his supposed change in the tariffs that he has no legal authority to impose, says that he got Modi to agree to stop buying oil from Russia. Whether that's real or not, we've yet to see, but it's indicative of Donald Trump recognizing that after saying he could end the war in Ukraine in one day, even before he resumed office in the United States, that he's gotten absolutely nowhere. And his MAGA base is unhappy about that. He needs to be doing things trying to show he is having some success, or to find ways to divert people's attention from his utter failure to fulfill his own, and let me add, ridiculous promise that he had the magical power to wave a wand and make the war go away.
David K. Johnston, thank you so much for joining us. As always, it's a great pleasure to talk to you on these developing stories. We will keep you updated on those talks as they happen in the next 24 hours. We move on now, and hundreds of unionized workers in Minneapolis, including hotel, restaurant and airport employees, are staying out of sight as they wait to see if U.S. immigration enforcement tactics will change in the coming weeks. Union officials say workers remain fearful despite promises from federal agents to focus on immigrants with criminal charges or convictions. According to local union hospitality industry, particularly those in Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport, they're afraid to leave their homes due to ongoing ICE operations. A third of U.S. hospitality workforce is foreign-born, and they remain in hiding amidst fears of arrest. Minneapolis's newly appointed border czar, Tom Homan, said ICE agents will target individuals with arrest records or convictions, but can still arrest others that they encounter. This approach has raised fears among Minneapolis residents and become a point of controversy after the killing of 2 U.S. citizens in January. The impact of ICE's presence has also been economic, with local businesses reporting a loss of $10 to $20 million in weekly revenue, affecting workers, families, and the city's economy. We move to Europe now, and French police have searched the offices of Elon Musk's social media platform X, and prosecutors have summoned the tech billionaire for questioning in April as part of an expanding investigation into the company. The raid and the summoning of Musk, which could further increase tensions between Europe and the US over big tech and free speech, are linked to a year-long investigation into suspected abuse of algorithms and fraudulent data extraction by X or its executives. In a statement, the Paris prosecutor's office said it was widening that investigation following complaints over the functioning of X's artificial intelligence chatbot Grok. The probe will now also investigate alleged complicity in the detention and diffusion of images of a child pornographic nature and the violation of a person's image rights with sexually explicit deepfakes, among other potential crimes. Musk and former CEO Linda Yaccarino were summoned to a hearing on April the 20th. Other ex-staff were also summoned as witnesses. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.